Hi, hello, and welcome to Rebel Unicorn Crafts. So I had an idea. One of the most common questions I have is like, how do I recreate something that I saw? And I always have trouble answering that because there are so many variables. What paint are you using? How are you diluting it? Are you using additives? What's your technique? Are things leveled? You name it. So I thought, what if I tried to do two fluid paintings that looked exactly the same? So I'm going to try to do the same colors. I'm going to start by doing ones as if I were you.
So if I were you, I would be at home. I'd see something online that intrigued me, and I would watch the video probably pretty carefully, but and maybe I'd even have some knowledge of the person who does this and what they technically do. So I chose this painting from Tictus, and it's this beautiful, very simple center swipe method that I hadn't ever seen utilized before. So the first thing I did was watch this a few times and then research what Tictus typically uses for their supplies. And they use artist-grade acrylic paints, and in their kind of descriptions, they don't say that matters quite as much as long as it's more artist-grade. If you click the links, it takes you to an Amazon page with acrylic paints, and Arteza was one of the recommended ones. I have that, so I wanted to use that since I already have it. One thing that is absolutely going to be different already is they typically use the Liquitex pouring medium. I do not have that, and I know a lot of people are hesitant to purchase it because of the cost. So I'm not going to use that. I do have Floetrol, which is quite common with people at home doing this, so I'm going to go ahead and substitute that so we already have one change. Possibly two, because my paints are probably different. Oh, and actually 3 changes, because I don't have a long canvas like that. I watched this video a few times just to make sure I knew what was happening. There you put a black kind of float on, do a dirty cup-ish flood pour in the middle, and then you swipe 2 different times from either side, and then you do some cleanup, and if you want to remove some of the paint or cells, you just move it around and just see what happens. So let's try it. Before I start this attempt, I want to take one step forward and tell you kind of my thought process on this. I want to work my way to the easiest way to recreate paintings. So the hardest is going to be picking a technique that you've never tried before. I've never tried this one. Watching somebody's video, not knowing exactly what supplies they have, and trying to recreate it on your own. Then I'm going to do some more pours that have a lot more variables, but I will control the variables of the supplies. And then I will do some more techniques that are easier to control and therefore going to give you a better possibility of actually recreating. So let's get started. Okay, back to this center swipe. Tictus did add some silicone to the blue color, so after mixing up my colors to as close of specifications using what I had to what I think they're using, I went ahead and added the silicone to this blue. And then as they did, I put a kind of a float layer of this black all over the canvas. And then I layered my pseudo dirty cup as it seemed they did, which was alternating blue and white 2 different times. From there, the demonstrated process was to dump this kind of in the center to expose some of the different colors, but keeping it in the center. And then add some extra black to one side, and it appeared that the swiping mechanism they used was parchment paper, I think. It might have been wax paper, but I think it's parchment, and that's what I'm going to use. And you swipe it off to one side, And then you're going to do the opposite. After you've swiped it off to that one side, you're going to scoop off the part that went off the side you swiped towards, and then you're going to swipe in the other direction. That was the primary part of this pour. So let's check in. Here's where I'm at after doing that, and here is where Tictus was after that process when they started the cleanup. You can already see a few differences. In general, I have the general kind of middle area covered, but my cells are definitely different. Mine are a little bit more uniform, and theirs have this kind of lovely, naturally varying difference to them. So to try to emulate this as best I can, I will kind of continue with the way they did theirs, which was they added a little more black paint on the sides, and they did some cleanup, and in certain areas they did kind of recover certain parts of those cells or try to kind of round that off a little bit more. So I'm just going to keep going, and we'll see how those cells continue to develop and see how close I came. Here's where I ended. It's definitely interesting, and I got those cells popping up from kind of a similar swipe, but I'm not sure I can fully say I recreated Tictus's one, because look at those gorgeous, huge cells. So let's try again. All right, so let's try another test where we might have different variables. So in this test, we're going to have the same exact supplies. We're going to know the approximate mixing and use the same technique. Now, the main difference we'll have is that if you're mixing colors, you might not come up with the exact same colors, even though you're using the same color bases and supplies. For this, I did my usual. I used Craft Smart paint with water to the right consistency, and I added some dish soap into the white and the light blue. Now, that's not my usual, but I really liked the effect that it made, so I'm going to use it again. And this technique I'm going to be using is going to be kind of a layered lines and make a little bit of a river for a Dirty Cup river. So I decided to do this painting the night before, and then to remove myself a little bit, I waited till the next morning to redo it so that I had the general knowledge, I had the same exact supplies because I'm the one with the technique and I'm the one mixing everything up, as well as the one who has the supplies. But I tried to remove myself a little bit because typically when you're going to be testing yours, you're not going to be doing them right next to each other. So I wanted to make sure there was a little bit of time separation. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up so you can see the general technique I used, and we'll come back and see if I can recreate it the next morning, basically the same. On a side note, I have been really enjoying kind of exploring these different techniques because I'm finding out what I like, and things that I like are kind of rivers with some negative space. That's what the white is. But I do like some of those cells, and I really liked what the dish soap did. I got a few comments on my last one that I might be using a special dish soap that does that not everyone does. So this is a Dawn concentrated one, and that apparently is what does kind of that lacing cellular part. So we'll let this develop and sit overnight, and then we'll try to recreate the same effect. And here is the painting the next day. It hasn't changed too much, but you can definitely tell it's the next day from the light streaming in. So we will have a little bit different lighting for this next one, but let's go ahead and try to replicate that. So I will start by remixing all those colors again. I had a white, I had 3 blues, and a sandy color, and some gold. Now, I have a slight advantage because I was the one who mixed these previously. So even if you have the same supplies as somebody else, it's going to be a little harder to replicate because you might have a slightly different tendency for how you mix. I'm pretty consistent in the consistency I like to pour, and that will be a little different for you. I did rewatch the video footage that I took so I would be familiar with the technique. Now, what happens when I get started, we'll see if I remember, but I added my dish soap to my 2 different colors. And then I got started making my dirty cup, trying to basically replicate what I did with the dirty cup before. But this is probably going to be where a lot of the different changes are going to be within it. Anytime you have a variable like a dirty cup or something where you're not directly controlling where the paint goes is more opportunity for more differences to appear. And again, I'm going to try to replicate kind of the same shapes and placement that I did of the previous ones. And I can already tell that my memory had failed me a bit because instead of starting with blues, I started with a different color. So I wasn't watching at the exact same time. And now that's really only a problem if you are trying to do kind of an exact replica, which I was, so I should have been more careful about this. But I was kind of, in the zone, and I think a lot of us get that way when we start pouring. You just start kind of going with it. But either way, it was kind of the intention of what I had. I wanted to replicate a similar look to see if I could get the same kind of look and feel to the painting. So let's go ahead and I'll finish moving this around and we'll do a little comparison. And here's where I ended up. I had similar colors. They're not exactly the same because I did mix my own colors, but I didn't have as much of that lacing on the side as I previously did in my first try. So this is the pour number 1, and here is my second one. You know, they're the same as far as directionality and colors. Here they are side by side, and they look similar, but I don't know if I would call this a win as far as the same technique if what I was going after is that lacing area, even though I replicated all the same things. Okay, let's try a third time. In this test, I want to use the same paints. I'm going to paint them one directly after another so that I am giving it my best shot. I'm going to use the exact same paint, so the ones that I mixed. But more importantly, I'm going to be using a technique that's more controllable. I think the more times that you add in variables that are unpredictable, like dirty cups and flips, and needing things to float to the right areas, the more chances you have to not replicate what you're trying to replicate. Again, I'm going to use these CraftSmart paints because I have a ton of them and I want to use them. And I'm going to mix up enough of each color that I'm going to be using to cover both paintings in equal amounts. I'm going to be using just CraftSmart and just water. So for this test, I wanted to recreate kind of a beach scene. And I am going to do a small dirty cup part of this because I want there to be kind of some mixing of the colors. So I'm going to have a sandy area, the white breaking of the waves, and then the colors are going to get lighter or darker as they go further from the sand. But at one part of that, I do want there just to be some kind of combining of the paints, as well as it wouldn't be a fluid pour without a few wild variables. But this, I'm not going to necessarily layer things with the intention of them showing up underneath other than this dirty cup area. And then I'm also going to be doing a little manipulation so that I can control it further to try to replicate the same results. If you watch a lot of resin videos like I do, part of this process is going to look kind of familiar. So I did do my darkest part will be in the upper left corner, so that's why I did the dirty cup where I did. This is the sandy area, and the gold, I don't need there to be cells. I just want certain parts of the sand to be a little shiny. And then we're going to put the white, the light blue, then the medium blue, and then we'll put the dark blue on the other side of that dirty cup. And then I did a second little stripe of the white as well, because sometimes there's like 2 layers of those breaking waves. If at this point you didn't think you have enough paint, I was a little worried about that. I filled in a few gaps, and then I just went ahead and poured. So see, my only real part here that's going to be really difficult to replicate is that area with that dirty cup. But that's not necessarily the effect I'm getting. The part that I really want to kind of look beachy is where that white and the beige are going to kind of come together. So that's where I want to have the manipulation part of it. That mixing part, I think as long as it looks kind of similar, it will have a similar effect. So I'm going to do a few things here to manipulate that area. I'm going to add a little more white, and I'm going to do some kind of like little swipes with a palette knife back and forth. And then, depending on how it's turning out, I will also go ahead and blow on those areas to kind of give it a more natural look. But I wanted to start by kind of swiping this. So we want it to look like this is the area where everything's mixing. I did think that this needed a little bit more natural look to it, so I blew from kind of both directions into the white and from the white into both the blue and the sand. And you can't exactly see what I'm doing because, well, my head's in the way. But I feel like it gave it a little more free-flowing look to it, and I'm pretty happy with it kind of looking beachy. So we're going to go ahead and try again. So remember, these are the exact paints I used on the other one, so there will be no difference in consistency, no difference in the color, or additives, anything like that. I'm directly using the exact same paints, but I'm just trying to replicate the painting I did in the upper right hand corner. That's the other thing, is since I'm doing these right after each other, I wanted this one to be in view so I could really see what it was and try to replicate the same effect. This will be really sped up, but I'm going to try to do the exact same things I did. Well, not exact because I'm not a robot, but the sandy color mixed in with a little bit of the gold, white, then going from lightest to darkest around the dirty cup, adding that second white strip, lifting and tilting and then blowing on the white strip in multiple directions. And I can already tell, this is already a lot more similar than my other ones, even though we did have a dirty cup part of that. That part is definitely different, but it doesn't seem to be a big difference in the technique part of it. So, if I were recreating this look, I would be very happy, and I would say that was a successful test where I recreated this technique. So I guess what I'm trying to say, let's do a little comparison, but between the two. But this technique here had more variables I could control and more manipulation I could do that didn't require waiting and a little bit of luck. Here they are a little more clearly side by side, and I'd say I'm pretty happy with that replication. It's not exactly the same, but it sure is close enough for me. So here are the things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're trying to recreate a technique you've seen online. The first is, do you have the same supplies? Often people are in different geographic locations, which means different things are available for you to use. Also, just what do you have? Do you want to have to spend a ton of money each time you want to do a new pour technique? What's your consistency? This is the biggest problem I see people having. They use different consistencies than the people who mix them. What you're comfortable with might be different, but that's going to affect how the pour comes out. Are your colors the same? Even if you're using the same supplies, if you're swapping colors, the different colors could have different bleeding effects. They could be more opaque. They could be more staining. There are different things that can happen even within the same supplies with different colors. How much luck does the technique you've chosen to replicate involve? So basically, some of those big beautiful cells and swipes and things, you're not going to ever be able to entirely replicate. Like the first one I did, yes, I got cells, but I did not get the same cells, and I did not get where some areas the white peeked through more, and some of that had to do with the supplies I had, but some had to do with kind of the luck of the draw. How much control does the technique that you're using allow for? You noticed probably in my last one, there were a lot of things I could do to help to replicate it, like that final blowing and swiping, and that I could really control, and I did not have to kind of let the paint do what it wanted. And finally, probably most importantly, is how many liberties did you take while you were doing the pouring? You see that I did it too. When you're in the zone, things happen and you change things up as you want them to or as they need to change. But you can't go into a pour and want to replicate exactly the same thing and kind of do your own little things to it and expect the same results. It's totally fine that yours is different than what you initially started with, because things happened and changed and you went with the flow. Enjoy the process. And artwork is all about doing your own interpretation, so those changes are perfectly normal. Good luck and happy pouring. I hope you have a magically creative day.